Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour and watched the stars through the main screen. He had dreamed of this moment his whole life. Humanity was finally going to the stars. The quantum fold drive hummed quietly below his feet and made space bend around their ship. They could travel faster than light now. The whole crew felt excited about what they might find out there. Navigator Lisa Carter checked her instruments and smiled. The first star system was only 3 hours away. She had calculated the jump perfectly. Chief Engineer Bobby Kane worked in the engine room and kept their new drive running smoothly. Dr. Amanda Cross sat in her lab and prepared for the greatest discovery in human history. They were going to meet aliens for the first time. The ship dropped out of fold space near a yellow star with 6 planets. Jake looked at the scanner readings and felt confused. The system had 3 worlds that could support life, but the sensors showed no radio signals or energy signatures. Lisa ran deeper scans while Bobby checked the drive systems. Everything worked perfectly, but where were the aliens? Dr. Cross found ruins on the second planet. Ancient cities covered the surface, but no life signs appeared on any scanner. The buildings looked old and empty. Jake ordered a landing party to investigate. They took a shuttle down to the surface and walked through streets that had been silent for thousands of years. The alien architecture was beautiful, but strange. Tall spires reached toward the sky and connected with bridges made of unknown metals. Carvings covered every wall, but the team could not read the alien writing. Amanda took samples and photos while the others explored deeper into the dead city. They found what looked like a library in the center of the city. Crystalline storage devices lined the walls and still glowed with faint energy. Bobby connected his portable computer to one of the devices and downloaded the alien data. The translation programs worked slowly but began to make sense of the alien language. Jake read the first translated text and felt his blood turn cold. The aliens called themselves the Viridian Empire and had ruled this system for 10,000 years. Their final records spoke of something terrible approaching from deep space. Ships had appeared at the edge of their system and demanded surrender. When the Viridians refused, the attackers had destroyed every city and killed every living being. Lisa found similar records in 3 more systems. Each dead world told the same story. Advanced civilizations had thrived for thousands of years before mysterious attackers appeared and wiped them out completely. The pattern repeated across dozens of star systems. Something was hunting intelligent species and leaving only empty worlds behind. Amanda discovered data fragments that mentioned the attackers. The aliens called them different names, but all descriptions matched. They were called the Harvesters or the Silent Death or simply the Hunters. Every record ended the same way, with desperate warnings about entities that traveled between stars and eliminated any species that reached for space. The team returned to the Endeavour with heavy hearts. Jake called the senior staff together and shared what they had learned. The galaxy was not full of life and wonder as they had hoped. Instead, it was a graveyard where entire civilizations had been murdered by unknown forces. The excitement of first contact had turned into the horror of mass extinction. Bobby studied the alien technology they had recovered and found energy signatures that did not match any known physics. The attackers used weapons that could crack planets and defenses that seemed impossible to penetrate. Every species had fought back, but none had survived. The Hunters had been doing this for thousands of years. Dr. Cross analyzed biological samples from the dead worlds and discovered that many species had been highly advanced. Some had technology that surpassed human science by centuries, yet even they had fallen to the mysterious attackers. Intelligence and advancement meant nothing against this enemy. Jake ordered the crew to search for more information. They visited 12 systems and found the same pattern everywhere. Dead worlds covered with ruins and filled with warnings about the Hunters. Some species had managed to hide small groups in deep space stations or underground bunkers, but even those refugees had eventually been found and destroyed. The crew began to feel afraid as they realized the scope of the genocide. Thousands of species had been eliminated over tens of thousands of years. The Hunters were systematic and thorough in their work. They left no survivors and took no prisoners. Entire bloodlines had been erased from existence. Lisa noticed something strange in the sensor readings while they explored the 15th system. Large objects were moving in the outer system beyond the dead planets. The shapes were too regular to be asteroids and too big to be natural. Something was coming toward them from the darkness between worlds. Jake ordered battle stations as the objects resolved into massive ships. Each vessel stretched for kilometers and bristled with unknown weapons. The design was like nothing in human databases, but the energy signatures matched the descriptions from the alien records. The hunters had found them. Bobby ran diagnostics on all systems while Amanda secured her research data. The crew prepared for the worst as the alien ships approached their position. Long-range sensors showed at least 6 vessels converging on their location. Each ship was 10 times larger than the Endeavour, and clearly built for war. Communications Officer Sam Peters received a transmission in perfect English. The message came through clearly, despite the impossible distance and the fact that no human had ever traveled this far into space. The voice was cold and mechanical as it spoke words that chilled everyone on the bridge. Jake listened to the message and felt his world change forever. The hunters had not just found them by accident. They had been tracking human radio signals for decades and knew exactly where Earth was located. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy and attracted the attention of its most dangerous predators. The alien ships moved closer with obvious hostile intent. Their weapons began charging with energy signatures that dwarfed anything in human arsenals. Jake realized that his crew might be the last humans to die free among the stars. The hunters had come for them, just as they had come for every other species that dared to reach beyond their homeworld. Dr. Cross worked frantically to transmit their research back to Earth while there was still time. The data about the dead civilizations and the hunters needed to reach home before the communication array was destroyed. Humanity deserved to know what was coming for them even if there was no way to stop it. The Endeavour waited in the darkness as death approached from the void between stars. The alien ships moved through space like predators closing in on wounded prey. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display and counted 6 massive vessels approaching from different angles. Each ship was larger than anything humans had ever built, and their hulls gleamed with strange metals that seemed to absorb light. The Endeavour looked like a toy compared to these giants. Communications Officer Sam Peters worked at his station with shaking hands. The transmission had come in perfect English, but no human had ever been this deep in space before. Someone or something had been listening to Earth's broadcast for decades and learning their language. The thought made his skin crawl as he tried to establish a proper communication channel. The lead alien vessel responded immediately when Sam opened the channel. A holographic image appeared above the main console, showing a creature that looked like a cross between a reptile and an insect. Its skin was covered in dark scales and multiple eyes glowed with orange light. Sharp teeth filled its mouth when it spoke in that same cold mechanical voice. The creature introduced itself as War Commander Vextar of the Kethvar hunting fleet. It explained that the Kethvar had been the dominant species in the galaxy for over 50,000 years. They had built their civilization around one simple principle that had served them well across countless millennia. No other intelligent species could be allowed to exist. Jake listened with growing horror as Vextar described their mission. The Kethvar viewed intelligence as a disease that needed to be cured through systematic elimination. They had developed technology specifically designed for hunting and killing entire civilizations. Every spacefaring species they encountered was marked for immediate extermination. The alien commander seemed almost bored as he explained the process. The Kethvar would locate a species through their radio emissions or space travel activities. A hunting fleet would be dispatched to sterilize every world and habitat that species controlled. The process was efficient and had never failed in 50,000 years of operation. Dr. Amanda Cross recorded every word while her mind raced through the implications. The Kethvar had turned genocide into an art form and practiced it across the entire galaxy. They were not evil or cruel in any traditional sense, but rather coldly practical in their approach to maintaining dominance. Intelligence was competition, and competition had to be eliminated. Vextar announced that humanity had been under observation since their first radio broadcasts in the early 20th century. The Kethvar had tracked human technological development and determined that humans would achieve faster than light travel within the next century. This achievement marked them as a threat that needed immediate attention. Chief Engineer Bobby Kane monitored the alien ships while they talked and noticed something interesting. The Kethvar vessels moved in perfect formation without any variation or creativity in their approach. Their weapon systems charged slowly and methodically as if following a predetermined pattern. Everything about their behavior suggested rigid adherence to standard procedures. Commander Pete Davis prepared the ship's limited defenses while studying the tactical situation. The Endeavour carried experimental weapons designed for deep space exploration, but nothing that could threaten ships this large. However, Davis noticed that the aliens were approaching with obvious overconfidence. They expected no resistance from their prey. Vextar finished his explanation and delivered what he clearly considered a generous offer. The humans could choose how they wanted to die. They could surrender and be killed quickly, or they could resist and be hunted down slowly. Either way, the outcome would be the same. The Kethvar had never encountered a species that could actually threaten them in combat. Jake made his decision without hesitation. Humanity had not traveled to the stars just to roll over and die at the first sign of trouble. He ordered all weapons powered and told Davis to target the closest alien ship. If the Kethvar wanted a hunt, then they would get one, but not the kind they expected. The Endeavour opened fire with everything it had while simultaneously launching every probe and shuttle as decoys. The aliens were caught completely off guard by the sudden aggressive response. Their shields absorbed most of the damage, but several hits got through and caused visible explosions along their hull. Bobby seized the moment of confusion and overloaded the ship's reactor in a controlled burst that released massive amounts of energy. The electromagnetic pulse disrupted the nearest Kethvar ship's systems and caused it to drift helplessly for several minutes. Damage reports flooded their communications as the aliens tried to understand what had happened. Sam intercepted the alien communications and discovered that the Kethvar were genuinely shocked by human resistance. In 50,000 years of hunting, no prey species had ever damaged their ships during first contact. Their entire military doctrine was built around the assumption that prey would either flee in terror or surrender. Immediately, the lead Kethvar ship recovered quickly and returned fire with weapons that turned space itself into a burning hell. The Endeavour's shields failed immediately under the massive energy bombardment, but Jake had already ordered evasive maneuvers. The ship twisted through space using every trick Davis could think of to avoid the alien weapons. Dr. Cross analyzed the Kethvar battle tactics while explosions rocked the ship around her. The aliens fought with overwhelming firepower but showed no tactical creativity. They had become so accustomed to easy victories that they had forgotten how to adapt to unexpected situations. This might be humanity's only advantage. The running battle continued for 2 hours as the Endeavour fled toward the edge of the system. The Kethvar ships pursued with increasing frustration as their prey refused to die easily. Several more human attacks managed to cause minor damage that sent shockwaves through the alien fleet. Vextar's communications became increasingly angry as the hunt dragged on. He had expected to finish this task in minutes, but the humans kept fighting back with suicidal determination. Worse yet, they were learning from each exchange and adapting their tactics in real time. This behavior was completely outside Kethvar experience. Jake ordered a final desperate gambit as they approached the system's edge. Bobby redirected all power to the fold drive while Davis launched their remaining weapons at the closest pursuer. The Endeavour jumped to faster-than-light speed just as the alien ship exploded from critical system failures. The crew sat in stunned silence as they dropped back into normal space several light-years away. They had actually survived an encounter with the galaxy's apex predators and managed to destroy one of their ships, but Jake knew this was only the beginning. The Kethvar would not give up after losing face in such a humiliating manner. Sam detected massive energy signatures throughout the local star group as the Kethvar called for reinforcements. War fleets were converging from across the region to deal with this unprecedented threat to their dominance. The hunt was about to become much larger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. News of the failed hunt spread through the Kethvar fleet network like wildfire. War leader Thexmar received the reports from his flagship deep in Kethvar space and could not believe what he was reading. A primitive species with crude technology had actually damaged their ships and destroyed one of their hunters. This had never happened in the entire recorded history of their civilization. Thexmar studied the battle recordings that Vextar had transmitted before his ship was lost. The humans fought with a desperation and creativity that defied all previous experience with prey species. They adapted their tactics during combat and used their own ship as a weapon without regard for their own safety. Such behavior was completely outside Kethvar understanding. The alien leader called together his war council to analyze this unprecedented situation. For 50,000 years, the Kethvar had followed the same hunting protocols because they had never needed to change. They located prey through their technology signatures, then overwhelmed them with superior firepower. No species had ever required anything more complex than basic extermination procedures. Captain Jake Morrison used humanity's unexpected advantage to begin a fighting retreat toward Earth. The Endeavour jumped from system to system while the crew studied everything they had learned about their enemies. Dr. Amanda Cross worked around the clock to analyze the captured Kethvar data and understand how these aliens had dominated the galaxy for so long. The Kethvar had evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest predators survived. Their entire culture was built around the concept of hunting, and they viewed other intelligent species as nothing more than dangerous animals that needed to be eliminated. They had never developed concepts like mercy or negotiation because they had never needed them. Chief Engineer Bobby Kane discovered that Kethvar technology was incredibly advanced, but also incredibly rigid. Their ships were built to exact specifications that had not changed in thousands of years. Their weapons were overwhelmingly powerful, but designed for fighting helpless prey rather than determined resistance. The aliens had become victims of their own success. Communications officer Sam Peters managed to hack deeper into the Kethvar networks during their next encounter. He discovered that the aliens maintained detailed records of every hunt they had ever conducted. Thousands of species had been eliminated over the millennia, and each extinction was documented with clinical precision. The Kethvar treated genocide like a science. Lieutenant Ryan Bell worked with Sam to decode more alien transmissions and learned disturbing details about previous resistance attempts. Some species had managed to fight back for brief periods before falling to Kethvar persistence. The Althari had held out for 3 years before their last world was sterilized. The Zefkim had lasted nearly a decade through clever hiding tactics. Every resistance had eventually failed because the Kethvar had unlimited time and resources. They would pursue a single species across the galaxy for centuries if necessary to complete their extermination. No prey had ever escaped their attention once marked for death. The galaxy was littered with the bones of civilizations that had tried and failed to survive. Dr. Cross made a breakthrough when she discovered records of species that had come close to defeating the Kethvar before ultimately failing. The Nexari had actually pushed the aliens back and reclaimed several star systems before their resistance collapsed. The Kethvar had been forced to adapt their tactics for the first time in millennia during that conflict. The alien records showed that the Kethvar military had struggled against opponents who fought unconventionally. Species that used guerrilla tactics or asymmetric warfare could cause significant problems before being overwhelmed. However, every resistance had eventually fallen because they lacked the numbers or resources to match Kethvar industrial capacity. Commander Pete Davis studied the tactical data and realized that humanity might have one crucial advantage that previous species had lacked. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who could pursue prey across vast distances without giving up. Their entire psychology was built around never accepting defeat even when facing impossible odds. The Endeavour continued its journey toward Earth, while being pursued by an ever-growing Kethvar fleet. Thexmar had committed significant resources to hunting down this troublesome prey species. He could not allow word to spread that the Kethvar could be successfully resisted. Such knowledge might inspire other species to fight back. Jake received regular updates from the pursuing aliens who seemed genuinely confused by human behavior. The Kethvar kept offering surrender terms and seemed unable to understand why humans would choose to fight when defeat was inevitable. They had no frame of reference for opponents who refused to accept the logic of superior force. Bobby detected massive fleet movements throughout the local galactic region as more Kethvar ships joined the hunt. The aliens were treating the single human vessel as a threat that required overwhelming response. Word of their damaged pride had spread through their military hierarchy and demanded immediate correction. The crew discovered that the Kethvar had a rigid caste system where war leaders who failed in their duties faced severe punishment. Thexmar was under enormous pressure to complete this hunt successfully or face disgrace among his peers. The aliens had turned this pursuit into a matter of personal and cultural honor. Ryan intercepted communications between different Kethvar commanders and learned that opinions were divided about how to handle the human problem. Some wanted to escalate the response and bring in planet-killing weapons, while others argued for studying human tactics before proceeding. The unified Kethvar command structure was showing cracks for the first time. Dr. Cross realized that humanity had already achieved something no other species had managed in 50,000 years. They had forced the Kethvar to question their own methods and adapt their approach. The aliens were having internal debates about tactics, because their standard procedures were not working against human resistance. As they approached the outer edge of human, Space Jake made the most important decision of his life. Instead of leading the hunters directly to Earth, he sent an encrypted transmission to warn humanity about the approaching threat. Every piece of information they had gathered about the Kethvar was included in the message, along with tactical analysis of their weaknesses. The transmission burst toward Earth at faster than light speed, while the Endeavour took a circuitous route through several uninhabited systems. Jake hoped to buy time for humanity to prepare, while also gathering more intelligence about their enemies. The fate of his entire species now depended on how quickly Earth could mobilize its defenses. Thexmar detected the human transmission and realized with growing alarm that the prey was warning their home nest. The hunt had become infinitely more complicated, because now an entire species would be prepared for war, instead of caught by surprise. For the first time in his long career, the war leader began to feel something his ancestors had forgotten how to experience. He was beginning to feel afraid. Admiral Carol Hayes was drinking her morning coffee when the encrypted transmission from deep space arrived at Earth Defense Command. She read Jake Morrison's message 3 times before the full horror of the situation sank in. Humanity was about to face an enemy that had exterminated thousands of civilizations across 50,000 years. The galaxy's most dangerous predators were coming to Earth, and they had already proven they could track human vessels through hyperspace. General Kevin Burke received the emergency briefing within minutes of the transmission's arrival. The Joint Chiefs of Staff assembled in the Situation Room while technicians worked frantically to decode every piece of alien data that Morrison had included in his warning. The first Kethvar scout ships were already being detected at the edge of the solar system, moving toward Earth with obvious hostile intent. Dr. Sandra Kim led the xenobiology team that analyzed the captured Kethvar, behavioral patterns, and technology specifications. She discovered that the aliens had never faced serious resistance in their entire recorded history. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force against helpless prey, rather than actual combat against determined opponents. This gave humanity a potential advantage if they could exploit it properly. Burke ordered the immediate mobilization of Earth's entire defense fleet, while industrial facilities began emergency production of new weapons and ships. Humanity had been preparing for potential alien contact for decades, but not for immediate annihilation by genocidal hunters. The species that had survived ice ages and world wars through stubborn determination now faced their greatest test. Captain Tony Garcia commanded the first human fleet to engage Kethvar forces in the outer solar system. His ships used the tactical intelligence that Morrison had provided to avoid the aliens' preferred engagement patterns. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, Garcia's forces employed hit-and-run tactics that confused the Kethvar commanders, who expected their prey to either flee or surrender. The first battle near Pluto shocked both sides with its intensity. The Kethvar had expected to sweep aside primitive human defenses, but instead found themselves fighting opponents who adapted their tactics in real time. Human ships were individually weaker, but they fought with coordination and creativity that the aliens had never encountered before. Garcia noticed that the Kethvar ships moved in predictable formations that had probably worked perfectly against thousands of previous prey species. However, these same formations became liabilities when facing enemies who could anticipate their movements and exploit their blind spots. The aliens were fighting a new kind of war with very old methods. Lieutenant Colonel Nancy Wells commanded the planetary defense systems that protected Earth itself. Her missile batteries and energy weapons had been designed to stop asteroids and hostile ships, but she quickly realized they would need to be used in completely new ways. The Kethvar shields could absorb tremendous punishment, but they had weaknesses that could be exploited through concentrated fire. Dr. Kim made a crucial discovery while studying the alien psychology profiles. The Kethvar viewed themselves as apex predators who had never experienced fear or uncertainty in combat. Their entire culture was built around the assumption of inevitable victory. When faced with unexpected resistance, they suffered psychological shock that affected their decision-making abilities. The second wave of Kethvar ships arrived with war leader Thexmar commanding from his massive flagship. He had brought enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds, but found himself facing human forces that refused to behave like proper prey. The battle for Earth's moon became a grinding conflict that lasted for days rather than the hours that Kethvar doctrine predicted. Human forces discovered that their enemies had one critical weakness that could be exploited. The Kethvar had become so accustomed to easy victories that they had never developed proper tactical flexibility. Their commanders followed rigid battle plans even when those plans were clearly failing. This predictability allowed human forces to set traps and ambushes that caused serious alien casualties. Major Frank Cooper led a squadron of fighter craft that used guerrilla tactics against the massive Kethvar vessels. His pilots had studied the alien ship designs and identified vulnerable points where smaller craft could cause disproportionate damage. The fighters attacked like wolves, harassing much larger predators, and disappeared before the aliens could respond. Effectively, the Kethvar began to show signs of frustration and confusion as the battle continued without clear victory. Thexmar found himself facing a type of warfare that his species had forgotten even existed. The humans fought like cornered animals, but with intelligence and coordination that made them incredibly dangerous. Every Kethvar advantage was being neutralized by human adaptability. Dr. Kim realized that humanity possessed something that none of the previous prey species had demonstrated. Humans were persistence hunters who had evolved to chase prey across vast distances without giving up. This psychological trait meant they would continue fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The Kethvar had never faced opponents who simply refused to accept defeat. Admiral Hayes coordinated the defense from her command center while monitoring reports from across the solar system. Human losses were heavy, but they were inflicting unprecedented casualties on the Kethvar fleet. For the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy's apex predators were experiencing what it felt like to be hurt by their intended victims. The turning point came when Captain Garcia's forces managed to destroy 3 Kethvar ships in a coordinated ambush near Jupiter. The aliens had been pursuing what they thought was a fleeing human squadron, but instead flew into a trap that cost them nearly a quarter of their remaining fleet strength. The psychological impact on the surviving Kethvar crews was devastating. Thexmar found himself in an impossible situation as reports of human victories reached his flagship. His forces were supposed to be conducting a routine extermination, but instead were locked in a battle for survival against prey that had become predators. The war leader, who had never experienced defeat, was learning what fear felt like for the first time in his long life. Communications intercepted from the Kethvar fleet showed growing panic among their crews. Many aliens were asking questions that their species had not needed to consider for millennia. What happened when the hunters became the hunted? What did it mean when prey fought back successfully? How could their ancient dominance be challenged by such a young species? The battle for Earth continued as both sides committed everything they had to the conflict. But something fundamental had changed in the balance of power that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. The Kethvar were no longer the unchallenged apex predators they had always believed themselves to be. Humanity had proven that even the most dangerous hunters could become prey when they faced opponents who refused to give up. 6 months after first contact, the war had transformed both species in ways neither could have imagined. The Kethvar found themselves forced to adapt for the first time in their recorded history, while humanity discovered that they possessed natural abilities that made them exceptionally dangerous predators. What had begun as a routine hunt had become a struggle for survival that would determine which species ruled the galaxy. Colonel Danny Ross led the first human strike, teams deep into Kethvar territory using captured alien technology and reverse-engineered weapons. His forces had learned to turn the hunt back on the hunters by targeting supply lines and staging bases throughout the local galactic region. The aliens, who had spent 50,000 years as apex predators, were experiencing what it felt like to be stalked by something even more dangerous. The psychological impact on Kethvar society proved more devastating than any physical damage human forces could inflict. Their entire culture was built around the concept of being the ultimate hunters who had never known fear or defeat. Facing an enemy that actively hunted them back created a species-wide identity crisis that shattered their confidence in military effectiveness. War leader Thexmar sat in his command, chamber and tried to understand how everything had gone wrong so quickly. His forces had been reduced to hiding in deep space while human raiders struck at targets throughout their territory. The prey had become predators and were proving to be far more effective at it than the Kethvar had ever been. Captain Ellen Price discovered ancient alien archives that revealed the true scope of previous resistance efforts against Kethvar dominance. Several species had come close to defeating the aliens before ultimately falling to their superior numbers and resources. However, humanity possessed something that those species had lacked and that made all the difference in this conflict. Dr. Sandra Kim had studied human evolutionary history and realized why her species was so effective against the Kethvar. Humans were persistence hunters who had evolved to pursue prey across vast distances and time periods without ever giving up. This trait had helped them survive ice ages and natural disasters, but now it made them the perfect opponents for aliens who expected quick, easy victories. Human forces demonstrated this persistence by continuing to fight even when facing impossible odds. Unlike previous prey species who eventually broke under Kethvar pressure, humans seemed to become more determined the longer the conflict continued. They adapted their tactics constantly and never stopped looking for new ways to hurt their enemies. Ross discovered that many Kethvar warriors were suffering complete psychological breakdowns when confronted with their own mortality. These aliens had never experienced fear or uncertainty in combat, and could not cope with emotions their species had forgotten how to handle. Some Kethvar crews surrendered rather than face human attack squadrons that fought like demons. The turning point came when human intelligence located the main Kethvar fleet staging area in a system 20 light-years from Earth. Admiral Carol Hayes assembled the largest human battle fleet in history and prepared to carry the war directly to the enemy. The time for defensive fighting was over and humanity was ready to become the aggressor. Captain Tony Garcia commanded one of the assault fleets that jumped into Kethvar space and began systematically destroying their infrastructure. The aliens found themselves defending territory for the first time in millennia and discovered they were terrible at it. Their entire military doctrine was based on attacking helpless prey rather than protecting strategic assets. Hayes realized that the Kethvar Empire was much more fragile than it appeared on the surface. 50,000 years of easy victories had made them complacent and rigid in their thinking. They had never needed to develop contingency plans or adaptive strategies because they had never faced serious opposition before. Now, human strike teams began liberating systems that had been under Kethvar control for thousands of years. Many contained ruins of civilizations that had been destroyed by the aliens, but some still held survivors who had hidden in deep underground shelters. These remnant populations eagerly joined the human cause when they learned that someone was finally fighting back successfully. The liberation efforts revealed the true scope of Kethvar genocide across the centuries. Entire sectors of space had been sterilized and left empty, while the aliens moved on to hunt fresh prey. The galaxy had been turned into a wasteland by creatures who viewed intelligence as a disease that needed to be eliminated wherever it appeared. Thexmar faced a choice that no Kethvar leader had ever been forced to make. His empire was collapsing under human assault, and his people were beginning to panic as they realized they might actually lose this war. The hunters were being systematically outmaneuvered and destroyed by prey that had become something far more dangerous than they had ever been. Some Kethvar commanders began reaching out to human forces through intermediaries to discuss possible surrender terms. The concept of negotiating with prey was so alien to their culture that many could not even comprehend what was happening. They had spent 50,000 years believing they were the ultimate predators, but were learning they had only been bullies picking on helpless victims. Hayes demanded complete Kethvar surrender and reparations for the civilizations they had destroyed. The aliens would assist in rebuilding the societies they had eliminated, or they would join their victims in extinction. Humanity was offering the same choice the Kethvar had given to thousands of species over the millennia. Colonel Ross led the final assault on the Kethvar home system while Thexmar tried desperately to organize a last stand. The alien homeworld was heavily fortified, but the defenders had no experience fighting determined attackers. Their weapons were designed for planetary bombardment rather than precision strikes, and their tactics were completely unsuited for defensive warfare. The battle for the Kethvar capital lasted 3 days before their remaining forces surrendered unconditionally. Thexmar stood before human negotiators as a broken leader who finally understood what it meant to be prey. The confident predator who had expected easy victory was now begging for mercy from the species he had tried to exterminate. Admiral Hayes delivered humanity's final terms from the bridge of her flagship while Kethvar survivors listened with growing despair. Their empire was finished and their role as apex predators was over. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, and the new rulers intended to use their power very differently than their predecessors had. The silence that had covered the galaxy for 50,000 years was finally broken, not by the screams of dying prey but by the roar of humanity claiming its place as the ultimate predator among the stars. The hunters had become the hunted and would never recover from their fall.